from beyond the Beltway. This is Bruce DuMont with our weekly analysis of national politics, with occasional injections of rumor and innuendo, all offered up by a panel of political insiders, pundits, power brokers, public servants, and most importantly, plain-speaking Americans from coast to coast. Tonight featuring commentary by conservative Marty Garrity, liberal Salim Muwakil, gay rights leader Rick Garcia, Reform Party veteran Dawn Larson, and conservative Republican Kenton McCarthy. Our program tonight coming to you from our home base at WCGO in suburban Evanston, Illinois. Nice to have you with us. This is the 40th anniversary of this program. We'll talk a little bit about it later on. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about it this evening because there is so much to talk about it, but we will celebrate tonight, and we begin with two longtime guests on this program. Representing the left, we have Salim Muwakil, who's a talk show host for WVON Radio in Chicago and also a senior editor of In These Times, has been a guest on this show probably for much of the last 25 years. And Marty Garrity is our conservative card-carrying pro-life Republican this evening, and he joins us as well. Thank you very much for being with us. And gentlemen, I'd like to begin with you. I want to start with you, Salim. Today, Hawk Newcomb, who was the leader of the Black Lives Matter movement out of New York, he was on with Chris Wallace today, and he was saying that that black people don't support or don't trust Republicans or Democrats. Now, obviously, that falls in the face of what a lot of Democrats have been saying for 40 or 50 years. But do you agree with that assessment by Mr. Newcomb?
In a certain sense, I do. I mean, there's an activist element of the Black community that is very ambivalent about both parties. Mm-hmm. Not and is especially contemptuous of those who tout the Democrats as the savior of Black America. So there's that sentiment is definitely at large. But I think for the most part, the masses of Black people tend to fall into the Democratic camp. Mm-hmm. They tend to be supportive of the Democratic Party.
Marty Garrity, I want to ask you, because we have discussed race. In fact, the two of you have been on this program talking about race for at least 25 years. So we've spent a lot of time talking about it on this program. Do you agree that now is a unique time, more unique than ever before, and that we are likely to have some significant change in maybe racial attitudes in this country?
Well, I think that a key to that will be the election in November. It'll be a really crucial election, and much of what comes after that will determine where our society is going in terms of racial relations.
When this I want to go back to, as you say, a more radical or activist element within the Black community, Salim. Is there such a thing as the Black silent majority? Maybe people who are, they're not radicals. They may be victims in their house. They may be fearful of going out because their relatives or they might be, shot, or their relatives might be shot. And I'm wondering whether they represent a significant number that could show up on Election Day and maybe surprise people.
Well, that's an interesting question. I think there's considerable room for the growth of that kind of constituency. But what happens, and I think Republicans have blown many opportunities to enlist folks who have those kinds of inclinations into their ranks because of the racism that the Republican Party seems to be fond of. That has what it is, that element of the Republican Party that keeps many African American conservatives from becoming actively involved with the Republican Party, although many of their political and cultural inclinations are toward the Republican Party, especially the pro-life element and other aspects.
Salim, does Tim Scott of South Carolina, who's emerging as at least the Republican spokesman on issues of police brutality and the racial issues that we're talking about here, does he represent a unique opportunity for the Republicans maybe to get the attention of some African Americans?
You asking me?
Yeah.
Yes. I think, right. Like Edward Brooke. In the past, he was a Republican of great standing. He was also widely respected in the African American community. But the Republicans always shoot themselves in the foot when it comes to racial policies and racial sensibilities. They seem to be wedded to this kind of this neo-Confederacy.
Marty, your reaction to that?
I think it's much easier to generalize and say Republicans are racist than it is to itemize those particular issues that Republicans prove their racism. For instance, my guess is that if there's a Black silent majority, it includes a lot of parents who wish they could choose which school they're going to send their kids to, but they can't choose that because the teachers' unions, the Democratic teachers' unions, and the Democratic administrations in city after city, really every big city in the country, keeps them from having a choice of where they're going to send their children to school.
That's a very good point, Marty. But I want to ask a follow up. I agree with you, and I want to talk and get Salim's reaction on that. But would you also acknowledge that, notwithstanding all of the efforts that the president has, the lip service he has given to criminal justice reform and reaching out to the African American community, which are viewed by some as a very positive thing, when he retweets a white power comment by one of his supporters in Florida, and then it obviously was taken down by the president today. But when things like that happen, don't you think it makes a lot of African Americans and even a lot of moderate Republicans to scratch their head and say, "What is this guy thinking about?"
Well, I did not see what you're talking about. What was retweeted there?
Did you see the video?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, well, fine. The video is of a supporter for Trump talking about white power. The president retweeted that video, and then later on he realized that how foolish it was, or someone did, and they took it down. But again, it was a story for maybe 10, 12 hours, and I'm just wondering if confusion like that leads to mixed signals. And all efforts that the president may be making to make himself appealing to African Americans is lost when he makes a dumb movement like that.
Well, I don't know to the extent to which a retweet constitutes an affirmative statement by somebody, but what you can say is that whoever controls his tweets doesn't always think twice before they do something.
He controls his tweets. That's part of the issue.
Well,
we've got to pause.
I'm not so sure that's the case.
We've got to pause. I want to come back. I want to get your response to that, Salim, and also I want to broaden it out, as Marty suggested, on the issue of free choice of public education in America. 1-800-723-8289 from coast to coast and border to border and around the world at beyondthebeltway.com. Now starting celebrating our 40th year. Back shortly.
Hi, this is Chicago Alderman Raymond Lopez, just congratulating my friend Bruce DuMont on 40 years of Beyond the Beltway. Truly an American institution. Congratulations, my friend.
I'm Marty Garrity. Congratulations to Bruce DuMont on 40 years of hosting one of the most interesting political shows on the radio. I've been privileged to be part of that for 35 of those 40 years, and I look forward to being involved for the next 35 years.
Hi, my name is David Massiotra. I started watching Beyond the Beltway as a high school student, and now I'm a proud panelist. Congratulations, Bruce, on 40 years of broadcast success and intelligent political debate. Here's to many more.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
A line is a powerful thing. It connects the global economy to your living room. Cleaner air to stronger markets. Factory floors to less crowded roads. Today's progress to tomorrow's promise. Norfolk Southern. One line, infinite possibilities.
Bruce DuMont back, and I want to ask Salim Muwakil to kind of offer your assessment of some of the pieces of legislation that are making their way through Congress. And I'm wondering if you were to look at all the things that are meant to reduce police brutality and make it more responsive to the African-American community and make them feel more comfortable about calling the police, are there a couple of issues that stand out in your mind that really might have some change, result in some change of attitude?
Well, I think that the police have too much on their plate. I think that we need a serious effort to reimagine what U.S. policing should be about. There's too much of a paramilitary response to incidents that don't require paramilitary activity, and it's really not the police's fault in a serious way, because they're kind of constrained in the role that they've been assigned, and these are flashpoints in society that have to be readjusted. And I think that all of this contention over police behavior is a good thing, because it gives us an opportunity to reimagine really what the police should be all
Marty,
about.
would you agree with
still
that?
Operating on an old paradigm.
Yeah, the concept of reimagining. You know, one of the things that Hawk Newcomb talked about today was that, you know, many of the calls that go into a police department, really they're about social matters. They could be domestic matters. There could be mental health related issues, and then maybe by reimagining as to who goes out to a home to begin to investigate a crime, that maybe it doesn't require a police officer. Is there some part of that is there some part of that you agree with that, Marty?
Oh, I agree with that almost completely.
Okay.
The problem is that basically the call that goes out to the police department goes to a 911 operator.
Yeah.
And she hears somebody say, "My husband is having a nervous breakdown," or he's going crazy, or he's acting funny, or whatever. And then that 911 operator has to say, "Well, let's see, whom do I send? A social worker, a psychiatric expert, a guy with a gun who could stop this guy if he's going to go
All right,
crazy.
stop for
How
a
does-
second.
how-
Stop for a second. That's a very practical possibility. Salim, just pick up on the practical nature of what Marty has just talked about.
Yeah, I think Marty is absolutely right on this. A police officer has no expertise. He has no particular expertise to de-escalate any kind of mental health crisis. And it is actually exacerbating the issue by sending in someone who is trained with paramilitary influences to take charge in an aggressive way.
Would you
That's-
acknowledge
that's
that?
the-
Would you acknowledge, Salim, however, that in some cases, and again, when a call is coming into 911, the dispatcher may not know. In many cases, it is the show of force, not brutality, but it is the show of force that can, let's say, restrain a husband or wife who has been beating up their spouse. That takes a little muscle. Would you acknowledge that? It's not all about sitting down and reasoning, with their sociological problems.
That is absolutely true. That's why a police officer's job is extremely complicated and I think requires a higher level of preparation, training, and a temperament that is more suitable to those kinds of, those kinds of complicated problems.
Turning it around, if I'm a psychiatric social worker and I get a call from 911 saying there's a problem over at 111 Main Street, can you please go over and resolve it? There's a guy screaming and ranting and raving and whatever. Am I going to go over there and say, I'm going to go in without any protection. I'm just going to go in and try to talk this guy down. I don't think that's going to work. I think that you need anybody who goes into that situation needs to be confident that he has the wherewithal to control the situation if it gets out of hand.
Do you, Marty, believe that it should be easier for the public to get rid of a bad police officer?
Oh, Bruce, absolutely. You watch that 8 minutes and 46 seconds of this guy just impassively kneeling there and saying, you watch it, and after a while you start saying, get off. It's like watching a movie that you've seen 10 times, and you know that the kids should not go into the basement, but they do, and you're there saying, don't do it. And that's exactly what happens here. This guy, it's heartless. It's so hard to watch this poor fellow.
But
literally dying before our eyes.
How do you get someone? Because it's always said that there's one bad apple. We hear this and see this too often. I don't think there's one bad apple. I'm not even so sure it's one bushel. It may be an orchard, but there are cops out there who overreact. Now, I realize their job is tough. But again, I think it seems to me that, especially in that particular case, he had 18 beefs against him. If you have an officer with that type of record, and again, I think they have to be, adjudicated in some way within their disciplinary system, but no one should walk around with 18 beefs against them. And if they lose a job in Minneapolis, they shouldn't be able to go, to Bloomfield, New Jersey, and get another job. So the idea of this national database, I think is a good idea.
I think it's a terrific idea, but understand here, Bruce, that in almost every urban police department, the political control of that police department is held by Democrats. There are no Republican big cities where the police department is subject to Republicans. These are all Democratic politicians who have the control, who've given up that control in terms of union contracts to the police unions, and that's
Salim,
a bad situation.
Salim,
but it's not a Republican situation.
Salim, I'm not suggesting it's a Republican or Democrat, but Salim, I want to go to you and find out are the police unions are they too strong, and do we have political leaders that should challenge them more?
Both, exactly what you said. They are too strong, and we need political leaders to offer greater challenge. They've developed their own fiefdom all across the country, and it's a certain mentality that they manifest that is generally military oriented, generally you know, the blue, it's the blue shield above all. And it is contemptuous, really, of a lot of community aspirations, a desire for the police to be more community focused, to have a much more and to nurture behavior that is much more community friendly rather than antagonistic. Like, you know, I grew up, and I've said this in the past.
Yes.
I grew up really thinking that the police were occupying army. All of my initial contacts with the police department were negative and even racist, quite frankly. And this was growing up in New York. So I had a very jaundiced view of the police. And it's taken a while for me to adjust that view and understand the complexities of the job and why many police are put in situations that are very difficult to reconcile. But still, I mean, it's a job that has to be done, and so we have to have people who are suitable.
Yeah.
Now, in your particular case, Salim, and again, you have told this story. You were was it around 14, 15 years old was when you were first picked up by police or engaged with police?
Well, I was 9 years old, and I was slapped.
Okay.
I was slapped by an officer
what had you done? Nothing would warrant being slapped by a police officer, but in your
case,
what happened?
I was trying to protect my cousin.
Okay.
My cousin was being my cousin was a notorious workaholic, and so he was coming back from his job, and a police officer confronted him in a very aggressive and really unfair way, and I was trying to protect him, and the police officer just simply slapped me and knocked me down.
Let me ask you this question: when or have you had a positive interaction with police in your lifetime?
Several times.
Okay.
I had a good friend of my family who was a police officer. The most influential record collection I ever owned was gifted to me by a police officer.
Okay.
So I've had some very, very positive.
Would you say, and again, we should mention for those listening around the country, you host a Saturday night talk show on WVON, which is one of the premier talk radio stations for African Americans in the country. It's located here in Chicago. So your listeners, they come from across the African American spectrum. Would you say that there is a significant number of African American listeners just to your show that have had a pleasant or a positive response or interaction with the police department, or is it all as negative as the media has projected it to be?
That's a difficult question to answer, Bruce, because most times when people are calling the radio station, they're irritated, and it's generally because of some situation that caused them some sort of consternation. So I wouldn't hear of the positive.
Okay. That's a very good point. We do have to pause right now. Salim Muwakil and Marty Garrity are our guests. We will hear from them and move on with our discussion. We're going to get back to a discussion of choice in education as perhaps a core reason why we have some problems that exist in certain sectors of our society. 1-800-723-8289 from coast to coast and border to border. I'm Bruce DuMont, celebrating our 40th anniversary on the air.
Hi, this is Dave Cohn, and I'd like to congratulate Bruce DuMont and Beyond the Beltway for 4 decades of outstanding programming. I've been so honored to be a panelist on your show, Bruce, and we look forward to many, many more years of outstanding conversations with you about the views and opinions that exist outside the Beltway. Congratulations.
This is Doug Herman from Los Angeles. Hey, Bruce, congratulations on 40 years. It's a big milestone and something that couldn't have happened if you weren't providing a lively show with balance and bringing people something beyond the Beltway. 40 years. Congratulations.
Jeannie Ives here. Congratulations to Bruce DuMont and Beyond the Beltway for 40 years of providing excellent news coast to coast for your listeners. I've really enjoyed working with you, Bruce. You're terrific.
Here's how you can make your own face covering in a few easy steps with items you can find around the house, like an old scarf, a bandana or a hand towel, or you can make a face covering out of an old t-shirt. Fold it to the middle from the bottom, fold it to the middle from the top, fold it again to the middle from the bottom, and again from the top, and then 2 rubber bands, one on one side and one on the other side. Then you fold either side to the middle and you have yourself cloth face covering. It's that easy.
Flintstones, meet the Flintstones, they're the modern Sonic family. From the town of Beltway, meet George Jetson. His boy Elroy.
With instant acceleration, electric cars are more fun to drive and more affordable than ever. Electric cars are here. Plug in to the present.
Bruce DuMont back on Beyond the Beltway. This is our 40th anniversary program, which means it is our 2080 shows, and we have 2 great guests this evening. We have Salim Yamulwakil and we have Marty Garrity, and I want to take a moment and let each of them introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about how they got here and what they do when they're not on the radio. And Salim, we'll begin with you.
Greetings, all. My name is Salim Muwakil. I'm a writer and a radio host. I've been writing for 40 years now, journalism. I started out with the Associated Press and went on to do various stints with alternative publications. I began with In These Times magazine about 30 years ago, and I've been with them since then. I've also been a columnist for the Chicago Sun-Times and the Chicago Tribune. I don't know if there are many who can boast of being a columnist for both publications, but I was one of those. And I've also been associated with Bruce DuMont's show for at least 27 years.
Yeah.
I remember I got I used to be teamed up with Tom Roser, a notorious conservative, the late great Tom Roser.
Right.
And we used to have some epic conflagrations on the show. And it was, in fact, one of those conflagrations that got me a columnist job with the Sun-Times.
Right.
So I go back a long way with Bruce DuMont and really, really appreciate his contribution.
Well, we appreciate yours. Again, from the very beginning, we wanted to be able to present both sides every week that we're on. We originally started the show on a Thursday night. We switched over to Sunday many, many years ago. And again, it's always been my desire to have all sides of the political spectrum represented, and certainly you've been an integral part in carrying the flag of progressivism or liberalism or whatever you want to call it. But again, we appreciate that. Marty Garrity, tell us a bit about yourself, because you and I go back a few years as well.
Well, just a few years, Bruce. I am what you might call an anchor baby. Both of my parents were born in Ireland and came to the U.S., became citizens in the U.S. back in the 20s. I was an alderman in Evanston for a few years. I spent 5 or 6 years as a staff member for the Illinois State Legislature. But I basically, my career has been in commercial real estate. I have 6 kids, 6 surviving kids. 2 of my sons died. And I have 11 grandchildren, and I'm delighted to see them. And I haven't seen them in a long time because this shutdown has really cramped my style in terms of visiting with my family.
Yeah. I want to spend just a little time on that before we get back to our other discussion, and that is on the COVID-19. Again, the news of the last 72 hours is not good with the spike in Arizona and in Texas and California, and they're already backing up on some of the openings that they had in those states. Marty, what is your reaction? Because Are you worried that the president really is not demonstrating the type of efficiency in government that you had hoped that he would have brought to this subject?
No, Bruce, I really disagree with that notion. I think
Okay.
that the responsibility for me and my family and for you and your family lies with each of us. I don't like the idea of a government-induced shutdown. I don't think the government has the ability to stop a virus spread. It may have the ability to delay it by keeping people in, but ultimately, this virus is a savage thing, and it's waiting for us to come back out, and we're going to have to come out and do something about it, either with a vaccine or with some form of herd immunity. I always wear my mask whenever I go in anywhere.
Yes, you do.
And even outside, sometimes I do. But that's my choice, and I don't like the idea of government telling me what I have to do.
Salim, to you, what's your reaction to what appears to be a maybe some lessening of at least the focus of some people, and these numbers are going in the wrong direction again?
Which I really, I have no idea of what this virus can do. I rely solely on the expert opinion that I read, and I try to give myself access to. And from what I've been able to gather, we just have to be more conscientious about social distancing and wearing a mask. Evidence is mounting up that wearing a mask has a definite benefit for withstanding the ravages of this virus. African Americans are particularly susceptible to the virus, which seems to be such a cruel irony, because we are both extraordinarily susceptible to the virus and particularly vulnerable to the economic consequences of the virus. And so it highlights how the accrued disadvantages of slavery's legacy keeps African Americans in an inferior kind of situation.
Elaborate what you mean by that, Salim.
Well, the injuries of racial inequality throughout the history throughout our history in this country has accrued, and there are disadvantages. Many of us are living in community in neighborhoods in which we're living on the edge of survival. Data is revealing that the racial wealth gap is widening to extraordinary proportions, and there seems to be no prospect of narrowing that gap without some sort of extraordinary efforts at compensatory resources, reparations or something similar to that, because African Americans are relentlessly falling behind, and it's easily traced to slavery's legacy. It's easily traced to the momentum of the structural the structural forces of slavery's legacy.
To look at the core of how we might resolve this, there are some people who are listening tonight that would say the answer, I think a lot of people would say, whether they are black or white, they would say it's education. If you don't have education, you're not going to have likely a good job. You're not going to have the wherewithal to buy a house, send your kids to a good school, send your kids to college, and continue the life cycle. And there are others that would say, no, the problems are systemic in the black community, which has been assisted by federal government programs, that fathers leave the African-American family quicker than they do in the white community. It happens in the white community too, but the combination of these two things, there's a cultural issue that the blacks are responsible for themselves, and then there is the issue of education, which the broader community must give African Americans greater opportunities so they can take advantage of them. I'd like you to address each of those, and then I want to hear from Marty.
Well, the data reveals that education is not really the savior that it is often reputed to be, because those who have college graduates earn less than, or many blacks with college graduates earn less than whites in an aggregated way. They earn less than whites without high school graduates. That has been a startling kind of
I've never heard that. I've never heard that, but go ahead.
I've never heard that, and in fact, I think it's been established that black women with college degrees do better than white women with college degrees in terms of earning power. That's a statistic.
There is absolutely evidence that black women have been gaining status in recent years. There certainly is evidence of that, but in general, the black community has deteriorated in terms of its accumulation of wealth in comparison.
What about the cultural aspect of the breakup of the family?
Is another part of the accrued disadvantages of slavery. I mean, look at the fact that black people have been really prevented from accumulating any kind of generational wealth. Redlining has prevented any kind of real estate.
What about taking responsibility for children that you bring into the world? Is that not, does any of this go back to individual responsibility?
Data correlates this with job participation. William Julius Wilson wrote a very influential book called When Work Disappears, and when he talks about how things change, and especially in South Side Chicago, when the factories disappeared, when deindustrialization happened, and globalization took away many of the industrial jobs that used to vitalize the inner cities. Once that happened,
right,
black men lost their opportunity for employment.
I'm going to switch it over to Marty.
This is data.
Let me go. Let's let Marty respond for a while. Marty, go ahead. Respond thus far.
The greatest social mistake that the United States ever made was the passage of the Great Society. In the Great Society, we said to women, black and white, if you do 3 things, we'll give you money. If you don't work, if you have a child, and if you drive the father of that child out of the house. Now, when in the early 60s, black illegitimacy, 16% of black children were born in families without a father. That number has become 70% since the Great Society started paying people to do things that were against their best interest. If you give people money, if you spend money on something, you'll have more of it. If you tax something, you'll have less of it.
When we come back, you'll have an opportunity to pick up right at that point. I'm Bruce DuMont. Thanks for joining us tonight on Beyond the Beltway.
Hey Bruce, it is Josh Cantro greeting you from Central Oregon, where I'm on a hiking trip. I just wanted to thank you for all you do to present balanced viewpoints every week over the past 40 years. I'm a big fan of your show, and I've been fortunate to be a regular guest the past 3 years, for which I thank you as well. To another 40 years, Bruce, thank you.
Hello, Bruce. Kenny Romeyer with News Radio KLBJ in Austin, Texas. Congratulations on 40 years with Beyond the Beltway, another milestone in your distinguished broadcasting career. And thanks for the quality civil discourse on Sunday nights. From all of us here at KLBJ, we wish you continued success.
This is Mike Lotus. I want to congratulate Bruce DuMont on 40 years of Beyond the Beltway and wish him many more years of his wonderful show discussing the great political issues of the day.
Dallas, St. Louis, Nashville, Tuscaloosa. All major cities to feel the destruction caused by a direct hit from a tornado. Is Chicago next? It's not a question of if, but when, and the clock is ticking. Learn what to do now at ready.illinois.gov to become tornado ready.
Bruce DuMont back on Beyond the Beltway. Thanks very much for joining us. Salim Muwakil, you were about to respond to Marty Garrity's comments before the break. Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, Marty has a point that no doubt when there is incentive for people to do certain, when there's an economic incentive, that often drives behavior. But one of the reasons that men that the policies required men not to be in the household was because of conservative pressure. The conservatives thought it would be too much of a giveaway to provide women with resources while men were still in the house. So the women had to prove, they were required to prove that there were no men around, and that had a negative consequence, an unintended consequence of forcing men to stay away from these families. And so I think Marty has a point. There was a negative incentive, but that was hardly the reason for this preponderance of female-headed families. The reason, according to most researchers, it was the disappearance of jobs, the disappearance of the ability to economically sustain these families by men, and the fact that many of them were forced into the underground economy by the disappearance of the industrial vitality that drew many African Americans to the cities in the first place.
But for the first 60 years of the 20th century, Black fathers stayed with their families, and there was a depression. There were all kinds of economic problems, but Black families were basically intact until the government said, "If you break up your family, we'll give you money." And
that's not exactly correct.
Well, it's pretty damn close to correct.
Many Black, remember, most Black families lived in the South, and they lived in communal neighborhoods that were basically clergy based, that came out of a very deep clergy orientation. When they moved to the North, all of that was sundered. Many of their community connections were sundered, and they had to live in a completely different environment. So many of the cultural remnants of their agrarian past were carried over into the urban environment for a few years until that broke down.
Salim, let me ask you this: you mentioned
occurred before the 60s, but by the 60s, 84% of Black children were born into intact families. It was only the Great Society that broke that up.
It was the destabilization of industrial America that broke that up.
Well, okay.
I want to.
According to the data,
Marty, excuse me, gentlemen.
This is what the researchers say.
Folks, let me go in and follow up, because you talked about the religious community. You alluded to it, Salim. As you look back at the last 40 years, and as you look at the epidemic of crime that exists, the over 100 people shot in Chicago last weekend. We don't know how many are shot this weekend, but it includes a 1-year-old baby. And last week it was a 3-year-old child. So what we see every night on Chicago television is it's sickening. But my question to you is, Salim, what grade would you give the religious community, which has been an important part of the Black cultural life? What grade would you give them on dealing with everything that's been going on for 40 years? Because their messages don't seem to be having any impact at all.
They're screaming, to use a religious metaphor, right? They're screaming in the wilderness, because if people are designated to the edge of survival, where they can't be sure of where their resources are going to come from. They live in a predatory environment. Their environments are really dystopian in a lot of ways. They're predatory, and you know, people do what they have to do to get over, to make it from day to day. And so you can't develop any kind of cultural stability. You can't accumulate cultural capital when you're always on the edge of survival. And that's because of this endemic lack of resources, this chronic lack of resources that is really a part of slavery's legacy.
But the predatory activity that you're referring to, is part of that, is it the gangs that rule many black communities in the United States? Because the people that are home, they are scared to go out of their house. This gets back to the original part of our discussion. They may be fearful to call the police, but is it much deeper than that? And that gets into my original question about whether or not there is a black silent majority out there that is that's crying out for more law and order.
It's much deeper than that, but the reason it's deeper is because there's been black people have been plundered economically throughout our history. There has been we've been designated to the bottom caste.
Are they blaming the police for that?
History in this country.
Are they blaming the police for that?
We were brought here as enslaved.
Salim, are they blaming the police for that, or are they blaming the gangbanger who is enforcing a black turf gang? Why is it that they're not willing to help the police find people who shoot 1-year-old babies? Are they too fearful of dropping a dime on somebody?
There are many people who are they're more angry than you can possibly imagine because of the shooting of a 1-year-old baby. But the point is that we have, as we talked about earlier, the police are placed in a situation, a social situation, a choreography that is difficult to break out of because of our history, because of the momentum of our history. And we have to aggressively insert a new paradigm into this thing in order to change it.
On that moment, we are out of time. We are out of time. Salim Milwakil, Marty Garrity, thank you for joining us in hour number 1. Thank you for joining us for many discussions like this in the past. We'll have a lot more in the future. I'm Bruce DuMont.
I'm Nick Kalm. From coast to coast and border to border, there's no better place for civilized and stimulating political discussion than Beyond the Beltway. Bruce, congratulations on 40 years. Here's to many more.
Hey Bruce, Paul Lisnick from WGN TV with hearty congratulations on 40 years, an incredible milestone. My thanks for letting me be your fill-in host from time to time, as well as serving on the panel. May you have another 40 years of glorious success on Beyond the Beltway.
I'm Ryan Yanis, retired Army Lieutenant Colonel and Pentagon 9/11 survivor. I've been fortunate to be a guest on Bruce DuMont's Beyond the Beltway several times, and want to wish Bruce and the whole Beyond the Beltway team best of luck and congratulations for a great 40-year run.
Happy anniversary, Bruce, from Stephanie Hitt. You have set the ultimate standard for true civilized political debate. Because of Beyond the Beltway, I have made friends and colleagues from across the entire political spectrum. And you know what? That's a gift, not just to me, but to our entire listening audience. Thank you.
Welcome to the world, 2116. You can fly across town in minutes, or across the globe in under an hour. Whole communities are living on Mars, and solar satellites provide Earth with unlimited clean power. In less than a century, Boeing took the world from seaplanes to space planes, across the universe and beyond. And if you thought that was amazing, you just wait.
Today, fresh fruits and vegetables will go from a field in California to a grocer in Miami. A bottle of beer from Eagle Pass will journey to a restaurant in Manhattan. A 2x4 in Oregon will find its way to a townhome in Denver. A hybrid will say goodbye to Detroit and hello to a showroom in Austin. While a steel beam will leave a mill in Illinois for a high-rise in Phoenix. And a flat screen in China will head to an electronics store in Memphis. was today, as every day. Wherever you find business, you'll find us.